Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with Ashley Tellis, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace think tank in Washington DC, which also has a branch in Delhi. Ashley is an American citizen of Indian origin, which means that he knows both India and the US very well. Ashley, welcome to ThePrint.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Jyoti.
Welcome both to ThePrint and to India. And my first question to you is about the Indo-US relationship. You've known it long and hard, but Prime Minister Modi has just had a very successful visit to the US with the Houston event, 59,000 Indian Americans cheering him along with Donald Trump. What did you make of it?
Well, I thought it was a spectacle beyond imagination.
You've never seen anything like that?
I've never seen anything like that.
And you've lived half your life in the US?
Oh, absolutely. And I could imagine that an event of that sort with Prime Minister Modi alone could have been pulled off.
Right.
But that he was able to actually entice President Trump to join him was something that people...
How did he do that? How did he get President Trump on board?
I think it was a coincidence of two interests.
Mm-hmm.
The Prime Minister Modi wanted the president in order to be able to show that the US and India have a new relationship,
right,
which he has contributed towards building. And Trump's presence there would confirm that in a way that no communique could. But at Trump's end, there's also a very astute electoral calculation. He knows quite well that most Indian Americans generally support the Democratic Party.
Right.
And what he wanted to do was to appeal to that electorate using this modality to tell them that, look, I've been your best friend.
Right.
And it's now time to switch allegiances. And so he pressed some very interesting buttons.
That's right.
In an effort to send that message across.
So were these 59,000 Indian Americans now, do you think they will move towards the Republican Party, or will they remain Democrat, or what?
Well, I'm skeptical. My own sense is that the Indian American population has a very astute sense of their interests.
Yes.
And they also have a vision of America, which I think they feel is better reflected in the Democratic Party rather than the Republican Party. I'll give you a simple example.
Yeah.
They're all immigrants. Some of them are recent immigrants.
Right.
And they simply see Democratic Party politics today as being much more sympathetic and receptive to the concerns of immigrants than the Republican Party under Trump. Now, this is a new development, right? Sure. Because traditionally, even the Republican Party was very embracing of immigrants. In fact, they always positioned themselves as a party of opportunity.
Right.
But under Trump, that has changed substantially. And so I suspect that they had a good time.
Yeah.
They enjoyed the presence of the president, but I'm not sure that that will simply translate into easy votes for a Trump candidacy.
So Modi's, celebration of Trump, saying "Abki Baar Trump Sarkar," how did that go down?
Well, it's ambiguous in the sense that nobody quite understood what he meant. Now, there's one body of opinion that feels that he was talking about candidate Trump, in a previous iteration.
Which is what External Affairs Minister Jaishankar has said.
Yes, and I think there's one body of opinion that sort of believes that. There's another body of opinion that is somewhat disconcerted that the Prime Minister would come to America on American soil and at least appears to have endorsed a sitting president who is very controversial in American politics.
So these are Indian Americans saying this, or American Americans saying this? Meaning,
I think both.
The WASP community?
No, I think both. I mean, both the political establishment as well as Indian Americans who also have to think about their own interests in domestic politics. They have to live there at the end of it, who are sort of concerned. Now, none of this has reached alarming proportions or anything of the sort, but it was sort of noticed. And so I think, the government of India will have some work ahead to assure people that that was not intended in a partisan spirit.
Right.
It was simply part of the rah-rah moment.
But it was noticed also in the Democratic Party, surely.
I'm sure of that.
But also, if you remember 20 years ago when the nuclear tests took place, it was Democratic President Bill Clinton,
Yep.
who then imposed these horrible sanctions upon India.
Yes.
Later on, Obama was also a Democrat president, was quite tough on India in the beginning.
Yes.
And then, of course, the Indo-US nuclear deal happened under his watch. But Democrat presidents haven't been kind to India, on matters like human rights, etc.
Right. But I think most Indian Americans, and again, I shouldn't pretend to speak for the community, but most Indian Americans sort of take their cues from what are very natural self-interests, right? And the foreign policy positions of the party they support sort of factor in, but ultimately they're not determinative. I think the Indian American calculation is like the calculation of any ordinary American. Which party supports our interests in our newly adopted country?
Sure.
And when they look at that in the broad, span of things, they find on the key issues of integration, on the key issues of race relations, on the issues of immigration, the Democrats seem to be more supportive of their positions than at least the modern Republican Party is.
So, we're speaking about human rights issues in India, and of course, my question to you is about Kashmir. How has the abrogation of Article 370 and the reorganization of the state into union territories, how has that been received in the US?
So, let's take each in turn.
Yes.
I think the division of the state into 3 new entities is far more esoteric than people realize. In the United States,
and that's an Indian thing anyway.
Absolutely, and so
even if we're downgrading a state, but it's our issue.
It's an internal issue for India, and I think Americans don't appreciate or understand the implications, and honestly, I don't think care very much.
Sure.
The questions of human rights in a broader sense, I think, are issues of concern. But the government has taken the view that we need to wait and watch.
Your government?
The US government has taken the view that we need to wait and watch. We are willing to listen to India and India's position on the matter, which they have done. They have voiced concern about the need to remove the restrictions as quickly as possible and so on and so forth. But they understand that this is a complicated problem which intersects along multiple dimensions.
Right.
There's the question of terrorism and the threat of secession. There's the question of human rights. There's the question of the history of Kashmir's integration with the Union and so on and so forth. So for the moment, I think the worst challenges people are waiting and hoping will not materialize. And they are, just hoping the government knows what it's doing and that will
But that's a lot of hope and, expectation. You're hoping the government knows, hoping that the internet lockdown will be lifted, hoping the communications blackout will end, hoping that political leaders will not be detained. I mean, that's a lot of hope, actually.
That's true, but the point is, what can a foreign country do? I mean, we sit down and...
Well, the US is supposed to be the most powerful country in the world.
That is true, but there are 2 issues that I think are being in sort of tension here.
Like?
One is, we do have a commitment to India's unity. And we do have a commitment to supporting India in its war against terrorism, right? We recognize that in the last several years, Kashmir has been a battlefield of insurgency and terrorism.
Sure.
And so we don't want to do anything that will undermine India's capacity to deal with that challenge. On the other hand...
Including Pakistan-sponsored terrorism.
Oh, absolutely. And Pakistan-sponsored terrorism has been a very big portion of this.
And yet Imran Khan gets a lot of play in the US.
Of course he does.
Why?
Because, there is a certain sensationalism that is associated with a leader who comes there and sort of...
Meaning what?
Well, any foreign leader who sort of speaks in hyperbole.
Or Oxford English.
And Oxford English.
Even if it was a third class.
Well, I don't have to comment on that. But it was going to capture some attention. The real question to me is, does Imran's rhetoric, is it sustained? Is it sustainable? And the answer in my mind, is no. That people will listen to him, they will give him a hearing, but it hasn't moved US policy. It hasn't moved US policy in any fundamental way.
But on Afghanistan, it has. I mean, Trump has, first of all, cancelled the talks with Afghanistan, the Taliban, bringing the Taliban to Camp David. That's a separate question, but Trump, it seems to me, that is holding his Pakistan policy and is sort of associating it or linking it with his Afghan policy.
Well, there are certainly intersections between the Pakistan policy and the Afghan policy. But take, for example, the decision he made about aborting the Camp David summit that he had planned. That is a defeat for Pakistan.
No, that is a defeat.
Yes.
But Zalmay Khalilzad is back, the US envoy to Afghanistan. He's back in Pakistan as well as in Afghanistan. So they're not going to give up on the Pakistanis helping them exit Afghanistan.
No, how can we do that?
No, you can't.
The president has a view that we cannot stay in Afghanistan forever. That we have to sort of think of an orderly exit in a way that hopefully protects stability. Now, to make that happen, you have to work with the Pakistanis. It's a tribute to Trump, though, that he has managed to sort of stay that course, even while being extremely tough with respect to assistance to Pakistan. In days gone by, we would say we need the Pakistanis for their help in Afghanistan, and that would immediately translate into huge checks written out to Islamabad. Today, this president, for all his idiosyncrasies, has managed to keep both balls in the air. He's kept Pakistan engaged on Afghanistan, but he has not done that through these open-ended subsidies that previous administrations were tempted to deliver.
So he's not open to Pakistani blackmail, at least for the moment.
At least for the moment, and I hope he can stay that way.
We'll see what happens tomorrow. But anyway, so you said there were two issues. One was that the US is supportive of India's unity and integrity. And the second?
The second issue has to do with our conception of India as a democracy, as a protector of civil rights for its own citizens, and so on and so forth.
Do you believe that? Do you think that the US is concerned about civil rights of its own citizens?
Well, when you say the US, you have to decompose that entity, right?
Both
the US
the government
is an abstraction.
and the people.
I think the people certainly care, and to the degree that the representatives of the people matter, the representatives of the people care. So in the Congress, there is a great deal of attention paid to what is happening on the issues relating to human rights and civil rights and so on and so forth.
Like what?
I think you've seen that in Nancy Pelosi's, tweets and her statement, that they are paying attention to the situation on the ground in Kashmir. And while they're willing to give the government of India a respectful ear, I think they will all breathe a lot easier if we can move towards a situation where these restrictions are lifted. And I think they've not been shy about saying that.
So there have been some congressional delegations in Delhi over the last few days from both parties. They weren't allowed to go to Kashmir, but that was not surprising. But there has been some criticism from their side, and actually increasingly so. So is that a sense that you get, which is that just not the Democrats, but the Republicans themselves are also increasingly concerned about Kashmir?
Well, let me put it this way. I think if there is any part of the US establishment that has disquiet about Kashmir, it's the Congress. Because the Congress sees itself as a representative body, right? And so anything that sort of smacks of a suspension of liberties, a suspension of representative government, that immediately affects congressional equities.
But does the Modi government know that?
I think they do. I think they do.
So the Prime Minister knows that there is disquiet in DC?
Oh, absolutely. And I think in his own mind, he understands all too well, right, that this cannot be a permanent operating condition. Because first, that runs counter to India's constitutional processes. I think the way he thinks about it is this is an emergency solution that must evolve into orderly politics, right? That's his vision. Now, whether he can get there without hiccups remains to be seen. I hope he can, because I think, the people of Kashmir deserve that, the people of India deserve that. But, these are things that are both out of our hands and his hands.
Were you surprised that out of his hands? What does that mean?
Out of his hands in the sense that there are realities on the ground now that have their own logic. And so,
for example?
I mean, there is the restiveness in the street. We have to see how that restiveness manifests itself.
Right.
There are the preferences of the Kashmiri political class, which will be tested now because you have block elections and then eventually there will be state elections. So we have to see how different stakeholders within, the state of Jammu and Kashmir.
What happens if the lockdown continues for another month or so?
I mean, I honestly don't know the answer to that, but I can't imagine that it would be helpful. On the other hand, I think the government of India is in a dilemma. If they move too precipitously in removing the restrictions, they fear that they will lose control of developments on the street. And then they may have to respond with more forcible measures. And then those forcible measures bring in their train even greater disasters, potentially.
Right.
And so I think at this point they're struggling with trying to manage the disadvantages of restrictions versus the disadvantages of full liberalization.
And they don't know how to resolve that dilemma.
And that is a very difficult dilemma to resolve. And so I think from a US point of view, we have to have some patience and some sympathy as long as we see the trend lines going in the right direction.
Are you seeing the trend lines going in the right direction?
I think so. I mean, they have begun to recognize that the return to normalcy will require the return to a political process.
Right.
That will require releasing people from custody, beginning to have a conversation with all the parties involved, and so on and so forth. I mean, I think ideally from their point of view, what they want is a new consensus reached with the political class.
Or with a new political class?
Or within, well, both, right? Because the new political class, I think, is a generational project.
That's right.
It's not something that can be achieved overnight. So until that happens, you have to deal with the pre-existing political formations.
But the pre-existing or the existing political formations are refusing to deal with the government.
Well, at some point, reality has to take its toll on all the parties, right?
The BJP as well as the National Conference and the BJP.
as well as the National Conference and the PDP and everybody else who sort of, values, a return to stability. So everyone will have to make some very difficult choices.
What does that mean?
That means, I think, if the existing political parties choose to stay out, then they will have lost an opportunity to sort of strike a new bargain. And if you remember, soon after the 2001-2002 crisis, when I was posted here, we made the same argument actually to the Hurriyat. When the government decided that they wanted to go back to elections, the argument that we were making to Hurriyat leaders was, look, it's your choice. You can choose to sit out of the process, but then you lose the ability to sort of negotiate,
right,
an outcome that is favorable to your interests. And I think this is a parallel moment to that moment that occurred in 2002.
So are you saying that the BJP hopes to co-opt the National Conference and the PDP?
Well, whatever term of art you choose, there is a process whereby they will have to participate or not. And if they choose not to participate, then I think they lose the opportunity to, reconstruct a new bargain with the center.
But so both stability and instability are here to stay, and it's anybody's guess how this is going to unfold.
Of course, I don't think anyone has a crystal ball that tells them, because if they knew, then there would be a certain certitude, right?
So for the next few months at least, the US is willing to give the Modi government a long rope on Kashmir.
Well, that is my impression. My impression is that as long as the trend line is going in the direction of the removal of restrictions, the return to normal politics, with all its sort of meandering sort of paths, I think people would be willing to see where this comes out.
So a couple of more questions, Ashley. On India's economy, on growth, it's not been doing very well. Do you think it would help internationally, say on the Kashmir question, if India were to do much better and invite much more American business, for example?
Oh, there's no doubt in my mind. I mean, the 2 or 3 things that would be very helpful, both for India's own interests, apart from US-India relations, is first returning to, the phase of high growth. That by itself had put a shine on the India story. And whatever reservations people have about India get attenuated in the face of, Indian success. Right. So if India can recover some of that success, I think it would help. The second thing would be looking at India's trade performance, which in the last few years has gone in a direction that is somewhat, at odds with the post-1991 liberalization. For this administration in particular, that is extremely important because to the degree that American business, gets more opportunities, the better, the possibilities for American support. And then third, for me, the whole question of opening India's foreign trade regime for India's own sake, right? I mean, there has been no growth story in the last 50 years, which has taken place purely on the basis of domestic growth.
So do you think that because of Kashmir, the India-Pakistan story has been hyphenated again and internationalized?
Well, I think that is the risk. I'm not ready to say that that is a new reality that is permanent, but that is a risk that has accompanied, the government's current decisions. But to the
internationalization.
Yes, of course. Internationalization and the rehyphenation of India and Pakistan are natural risks that accompanied the 370 decision. But to the degree that India can strike out, go back to the path of high growth, go back to repairing its relations with, the major powers and so on and so forth. I think to that degree you mitigate, the dangers that accompany these choices.
And my last question is on China, a big question, but how do you see the India-China relationship?
I see it as being an uneasy relationship which has to be managed. I don't think, short of real transformations, with respect to the border, with respect to relations with Pakistan, with respect to Chinese penetration in South Asia and the Indian Ocean, short of dramatic changes here, that India-China relations can never become sort of normal. But you can manage uneasy relations.
Which is what Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping are going to do next week. Or this weekend. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And my sense is that to the degree that they can keep an uneasy relationship on an even keel, that's the best one can hope for. And I think the way India has played the China relationship has been simply brilliant.
In what way?
Which is they've kept engaging China while engaging other partners as well. And they've refused to either single out China, at least in their public, positioning, as a singular threat. So they've sort of mitigated Chinese concerns without in any way compromising on the need to hedge. And so they've deepened ties with the United States, they've deepened ties with Japan, they're now, engaging increasingly with the Quad. These are all good things. And so an omnidirectional foreign policy that keeps all balls in play, I think is a smart play for India.
And the fact that the Chinese talk about Kashmir, do you think that they are they're demonstrating some sort of insecurity by talking about Kashmir, by supporting Pakistan so openly?
I think they have always supported Pakistan. And this issue turned out to be so important for the Pakistanis that I think the Chinese government felt compelled to do something for their all-weather ally.
Right.
And the something that they did was essentially providing rhetorical support by essentially publicly calling into question India's decisions. Now, I think having said that, there are also limits to what China will do for Pakistan. And if I were Pakistani, I would not take too much solace from expecting China to carry, excessive amounts of water for Islamabad.
Mr. Tellis, thank you so much. That's a lot of food for thought. Thank you for speaking to ThePrint.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Always good to see you, Jyoti.
Thank you. And please continue to watch our YouTube channel. It's live and buzzing.